What's the lie you believed the longest in your life? Story 1. One time my mom was at the store and she brought home something for herself, my sister, and my dad. And 5-year-old me was like, "What did you get for me?" And to prevent me from being left out, she reached into the bag and was like, "Oh, I got you this potato masher." And for years before anyone mashed any potatoes, they came and asked me if they could use it. Story 2. When I was very young, we had a pet hamster. He got out of his cage, so my dad put the cage in the basement, thinking he might get hungry and get back in. One morning I woke up and there was the hamster in his cage in the usual place. I asked my mom how they found him, and she told me she opened the door to the cellar, and there he was, dragging his cage back upstairs. It wasn't until I was a teenager and remembered the exchange that it occurred to me she obviously made that up. Story 3. That my mom was a redhead. For years I thought she was a natural redhead. She was 40 when I entered the picture, so I always knew she dyed her hair. Just thought it was to cover up her grays. When I was about 35, my niece clued me in on a family secret. When my mom first spotted my dad at work back in the day, she asked around about him. Someone told her, "He only dates redheads." Mom started dyeing her hair from brown to red, and sure enough, she got the date. And eventually she got the ring. I never suspected. Photos from the 50s were like black and white, or sepia, and her brown hair looked like it could have been red. But she had 5 kids, and none of us are gingers. Just wasn't something I ever thought about or suspected. And yeah, Dad knows, but didn't broadcast it to us kids, so I believed that for ages. Story 4. While dating, my husband made a joke about the Chicago Bulls disbanding after their second three-peat. I'm not a big sports ball fan, so I thought he was serious. Just being funny, he told me this whole story about it being done because they kept winning and wanted to give other teams a chance, so the players all went the other teams. I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He was amused, and we went about life. From time to time, the Chicago Bulls' 90s glory would come up as a topic, and I would comment on how awesome it was that they were such good sportsmen that they disbanded to give others a chance. The first time I repeated it, my husband couldn't believe I still thought that was true and was so amused he didn't correct me. Every time it came up, he said it got funnier and funnier, and at one point he decided to see how long it would go on. Cue about 8 years later, and I'm at work, and it's the NBA playoffs. Lo and behold, someone says the Bulls are their favorite team. Cue my typical comment. But this time my coworker looked at me and was like, "WTF, did you just say?" The jig was up, and I went home and said, "Hey, did you know the Bulls never stopped being a team?" My husband almost wet himself. He was laughing so hard and said, "Someone finally told you?" I'll admit it's pretty funny. Story 5. My cat brought a lizard into the house. It was still alive. I decided to build it a terrarium and nurse it back to health. I did so and then released it back into the wild a few days later. My mom told me that the cat immediately went outside and ate the lizard after I had released it when I was 18. She and my dad knew I'd be devastated, so they lied by omission and didn't tell me. The way she sat me down to tell me scared the shit out of me. I thought she was going to tell me something dreadful. I thought I saved that lizard for years. Story 6. That our uncle died after being kicked by a horse. In reality, he died of cirrhosis in prison after being caught counterfeiting checks. I don't know why they didn't just tell us cirrhosis and leave it at that. We wouldn't have known. This was before Google. As it was, we thought the horse story was cool and spread it throughout the neighborhood, LOL. All puns unintended. Story 7. You know that Brenda Lee song, "Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree"? There's the part where she says, "Maybe we'll get some pumpkin pie." And I always thought she said, "Maybe we'll get some fucking pie." And my older brother indulged me and said that was allowed on the radio because it was a Christmas classic. I think I was like 12 when I finally figured it out. Story 8. That Santa was real, and even when I was told he wasn't, I still didn't want to believe it. I feel bad now knowing how hard my mom struggled to make sure we had presents, even with no money. She would crochet baby doll clothes for me. She would go to a dollar store and get so many dollar store toys. Kids were so different then. I was so excited for those toys, I had no clue they were cheap. Story 9. When I was a child, I had a bad habit of crazily blinking at strangers. So my dad told me that the number of times a person can blink in their lifetime is limited. If I kept blinking on purpose, I would use up my quota of blinks before the end of my life. Then I would painfully die from not being able to blink. My eyeballs will dry out completely and fall out. Now my bad habit is subconsciously not blinking for a long time. Thanks, Dad. Story 10. My mom didn't know how to be nice. She was unintentionally mean and she didn't understand how to be otherwise. That was a lie that I told to myself. I was 36 years old on a Tuesday evening when it hit me like a bus. She knew she was being mean. She intentionally said mean things to me on purpose. She knew she made me feel bad, and she did it on purpose. I hysterically choking cried for a solid 45 minutes and went into a full-blown panic attack. I stopped speaking to her for 2 years because of this realization. I was completely devastated and raging angry. I remember soon after my crying panic attack, I drove to the store to buy smokes. It had been years, and I was ready to fight every person I came across. I decided to just go home, learning the truth of this lie that my mother picked at me with hate needles my whole life intentionally completely destroyed me. We talk now, but not often. We used to live next door to each other, and, unrelated to this, I moved 2,000 miles away a year ago. Story 11. That I'm somehow special and normal rules don't apply to me. Spent the last 20 or so years believing that I can build muscle faster than anyone else. I can acquire skills faster than anyone else. That I'm smarter than everyone else. That I'm more talented than anyone else. This belief prevented me from succeeding on any level in my life so far, just spinning tires and getting fed up with myself over and over. I am 25 this year, and I think I've finally accepted the fact that I am not special in any way, shape, or form, and this realization is allowing me to now start where I am and move forward at the rate I am comfortable with. It's going to be a long and hard process, as I still believe that I can become a huge music artist in my own right. I've already invested 10 years of my life into it, so I don't see any point in stopping, but I am starting a career as a train conductor at the end of the month and foresee myself living that career, grind relentlessly for the next few years, investing all I can into music, and working on actually making that dream of mine come true no matter the cost. It's all I want for myself. I spent so long thinking about what others want and need that I forgot about taking care of myself and how important it is. Essentially, I'm starting from ground zero, and the only way is up from here on out. Story 12. From very early on in life, I heard this mantra: cheaters never win, and winners never cheat. In that same vein, hard work pays off. Both are completely false. I've never once seen any evidence to support either claim, but I do see example after example of the opposite all day, every day. Interestingly enough, the exact same people who told nay both of the above also told me life isn't fair. So I guess I should have caught on sooner. Story 13. You can't fake sincerity because sooner or later it reflects in your action. Believed it so long that I feel ashamed even admitting it. Takeaway is sincerity is easiest of all to fake. You could lose a lot of precious time dissecting and making sense of it, only to realize that most of people do things because it is convenient to do so. You can't predict who will definitely be there when you need them the most. Story 14. It's going to be unbelievable that anyone could be this much of a gullible idiot, but truth is stranger than fiction. I was at a friend's house when I was 11, and we were eating cupcakes. I started to lick the paper wrapping, scraping at it with my teeth to get off every crumb. My friend asked me to stop because it was gross. I said no, and that's when she told me the paper had rats in it. I was initially skeptical of this notion, but she went on to spin this story of how her mom, who was a teacher, True, went on a class trip to the factory where they made them, and some of the kids saw a guy pick up a rat and just toss it into the machinery, and that he told the kids they do it all the time. Don't ask me why I believe this. Don't ask me why this didn't make me stop eating anything in a supposedly rat-contaminated paper wrapper. There is no logic here, but I never licked a cupcake or muffin wrapper again. For over a decade, this was just something I believed and never questioned. Then one day, when I am like 28 years old, I was eating cupcakes with a friend. She started licking her wrapper, and I said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And she replied, "Why?" I opened my mouth to say, "Because it has rats in it," and then froze, as my adult brain put on the brakes because obviously that statement was ridiculous. At which point, I had to explain to my friend what I was about to say and why. And we had a long laugh about how I had believed this for so long. My only defense is the idea was so ingrained in my mind that I never questioned it until I was about to say it to someone else and realized how dumb it sounded. Also, to this day, I don't lick cupcake wrappers. Even though I know there's no reason not to, it's just become a habit. Sometimes I wish I knew where my friend from middle school is now so I can share how her lie, which she probably wouldn't even remember making up, affected my entire life. Story 15. That other way humans live in the West is sustainable. In the last 100 years alone, over 50% of the planet's wilderness has been destroyed. In that time, the world population has also gone from 2 billion to 8.5 billion. On top of that, the cobalt in the phone you're reading this on was probably mined by slaves, many of them children. Your phone was then assembled in a factory in China with atrocious working conditions. Your clothes were made in sweatshops. Our way of life and all the cool products we have access to at reasonable prices are predicated on the suffering of people in other parts of the world and the unsustainable use of the Earth's natural resources. Story 16. My dad took me to Family Video, and I wanted to go to the adult section part. I didn't know what was in that back room by the bathrooms. I just had realized the store was bigger than what I thought, and I was genuinely curious what was back there. He told me I wasn't allowed in because American Idol was being filmed back there, and I totally believed it for years. Story 17. I had a yellow parakeet named Tweety as a kid. She was super friendly, and I would hold her all the time. One day I came out to see she had turned blue. She also was terrified of me. I asked my mom, and she said that Tweety got out of her cage and my cat had spooked her. She said when parakeets got scared, they turned blue. Oh, okay. That's why she is so scared. The cat spooked her. Years later, they told me the cat had eaten Tweety, and my dad went to the pet store and grabbed the wrong color replacement bird. Story 18. When I was really young, we had a cat. They told me she ran away and we never found her. Many years later, we were talking about something and the cat came up. My grandma said something like, "It's a shame Grandpa ran her over." And my mom immediately did that thing where you're trying to stop someone, but it's too late. I looked around at everyone, and we all knew the jig was up. Story 19. That my family was well off when I was growing up. Well, Dad was. Off in a different country doing hikers and blow with the family's business's wealth. Very little of that came over to my mom and my siblings. So little that I qualified for free lunch vouchers. This was like 30 years ago, and I still remember really wanting a 6-inch Subway cold-cut combo that they served for $1.50 during lunch. Never did get that sandwich. My dad had me believing I was second-generation wealthy. It wasn't until my wife woke me up to reality that I realized that I basically grew up in a dump, just barely above getting food stamps. Story 20. My father brainwashed me into thinking I was good at baseball. He'd go over and sit by the other team's dugout and report back to me that the team was talking about how jealous they were because of my good pitching and catching. I was the first girl to play baseball in my city, so I felt intimidated. Many years later, I bragged to my teenage children at the batting cages that I was really good at baseball. My brother laughed and told me that Dad tricked me into thinking I was good, but I was never really that good. Story 21. I used to like the smell of gas at a pump or filling up the boat as a kid. Not like hugging it, but I commented I liked the smell. She told me that she knew a guy who liked smelling gas, and it got bad to the point they had to stick a long needle into his dick to fix the problem it caused. I was about 8/9 then, and when I would hold my breath still at around 19 YO, my GF at the time asked why I was doing that, and I explained why. Her mom was a nurse and with us, and she debunked that. Story 22. That I wasn't smart, that my opinion didn't matter. I started working on healing my inner child 20 years ago, and I don't have that inner voice anymore. Every once in a while, it rears its ugly head, and I quietly let my inner child know that I love her and she's a badass. That's all she ever needed. Story 23. When I was a kid, we got a kitten who died overnight on night 1. My dad says of it now that he woke up with a cat corpse curled up on his chest, but my parents didn't know how to break it to me at the time. Instead, they told me the cat had to be given back because it wasn't old enough to be separated from its mother. They forgot at some point that they told me this. So when I mentioned it to my dad at age 22, he looked at me like I was insane because it makes no sense. But they told me at an impressionable age when I was too dumb to know it's not how the world works, and it was never challenged by anything in my life. Story 24. I found out my parents never actually married. This revelation came accidentally over breakfast on a random Saturday. My dad did something that annoyed my mom, and they started yelling at each other as they often did. I was trying to be a mediator, per usual, so I was like, "Look, I can see you're both pretty upset right now, but can't we focus on something positive? Everything doesn't have to be a fight. There must be something you love about one another, or else you wouldn't still be married." My mom blurts, "Ha! I never married him in the first place!" Silence around the table as my siblings and I stared in disbelief. She realized almost immediately what she had done, but it was too late to take it back. We all had so many questions after that. Same line of questions also led to the discovery that my brother was only a half-brother, and we had different dads entirely. Completely shattered my world. Truly, I can still remember where I was sitting when the realization hit me. I cried for days. For context, they were together for over 40 years. It was a total shock to my system to realize how long they had lied to us and why. Story 25. had a cat named Zella that went mental. She would always sit atop this one dusty closet in our basement because it was very near to the ceiling, which she would also hide in. Her mental state progressively got worse, and she no longer came down for food or anything. At one point, she even became afraid of any black object. If there was any black object in her line of sight that was bigger than she was, she freaked TF out. Anyways, one day my mom claimed she was taking Zella to the shelter for medication and returned without her. When she walked back in the house without the cat, we immediately freaked out, but she told us that Zella bolted out of her cage and into the woods. Now I know that she got put down, but as a kid, it was probably a good thing to hope she was living it up as a free stray, happy and alive. Story 26. Not me, but my eldest sister. We were talking about oceans and fish, and she told me that the Atlantic is freshwater LOL. I was like, no, this is something we all learned in geography and science classes. All the oceans are salt water. She didn't believe me and looked it up. She was like, yeah, you're right. I thought this whole time it was the other way around. So apparently she has believed that the oceans were freshwater most of her life.